there's things that you can do to manage your stress. I know it sounds cheesy, but hot and cold therapy is something that's really great. Ice barrel, then, heat. Are you journaling? I mean, it sounds like a corny thing, but are you writing down certain things and thoughts? Are you going for walks? Are you getting 10,000 steps in a day? That's super important. Can you meditate? What is your therapeutic release to manage your cortisol, your stress hormone? And if you're doing those things, usually it's going to help tremendously.
Hello and welcome back to the Fast Foundations podcast. Tiffany and I have another mentor session for you today. We have Josh on the podcast talking about Blokes, his company. I'm super excited to have you, Josh. But first question, before we get into all the awesome details, is as an entrepreneur, how do I optimize health? And what does optimal health mean to you for entrepreneurs like me?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, you have to own that journey. You have to take some accountability, and you have to say, what is my optimal, pathway look like? There's a lot of noise in the industry as consumers. We're constantly getting bombarded with so many different things. And I think you just have to own that journey. And what that means to everyone is different. My optimization is simple. I just want to be a better husband, a better dad, a better entrepreneur. When athleticism comes into play for a 40-year-old, I want to be a better athlete. I want to be able to do things for a long time. I have a 5-year-old daughter and I have a 2-year-old son, and I want to be around when they're 30 and 40 years old, and making sure I'm healthy during those years.
Love that. Thank you.
Josh, I'd love to hear a little bit about like your story, how your entrepreneurial journey, and how you got started with Blokes.
Sure. So I'll step back a little bit, not to bore your listeners, but I've been in the health and wellness space for almost 15 years now. And I got my start with a big med device company that many probably have heard of called Stryker. So I was an orthopedic spine rep. I was a guy in the OR. You didn't ever see me, and you didn't want to if you did, because that means your back was all messed up. That said, I left Stryker about 5 years into it, and I wanted to see if the grass was greener from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And I left, and I started my own med device distributorship. Got into owning and operating labs and pharmacies and regenerative medicine. Stem cell clinics is the buzzword. And as I was in the latter phase of that, which was the stem cell business, a big thing happened in everybody's life called COVID, and it shut our clinics down for a solid 6 months. And we were treating patients at age range from, probably late 50s to early 70s for osteoarthritis. So those patients were not leaving their house, and they certainly weren't spending money on larger packages for, treatment of OA that was elective and out of pocket, ranging from $5,000 to $10,000. So that happened. At the same time, I happened to be going through my own personal struggles and health. Being an entrepreneur, grinding for so many years, partying hard, playing hard, the whole 9 yards. I let my body go. My wife and I went through 4 miscarriages. And for those listening, if you're in that position, or if your wife is pregnant, know that the man's body can change substantially with that. Testosterone levels can change. Stress obviously increases. But all that kind of made for this wonderful thing that I'm now doing. I had my personal struggles mixed with the stem cell clinics getting hit pretty bad by COVID, to launch this business that's focused on men's health and women's health. And but it sparked all because of my personal struggles. I had a really horrible testosterone score. And not only did I have a horrible testosterone score, my symptoms were bad. My sex drive had tanked. My brain fog was there. I started getting belly fat in areas that I never got. And I wasn't working out. And I drank 12 cups of coffee a day just to get through it. And I went through the standard process, primary care doc, like most people do. And I was told I was on the low side of a range. And there was nothing I could do, just go home and start eating healthy and lose a few extra pounds. And I knew something was off. And that's when I finally found a hormone specialist, and it changed my life. It saved my marriage. It sparked this entrepreneur aspect in me to start this business and bring it to men and in a more accessible, more convenient way while not losing any of the clinical effectiveness.
That's cool. Thanks, Josh. And when you say, before we get into specifically what you do and hormones and all the different ways to solve those problems, let's talk about the problems themselves, because I think a lot of our listeners, probably most of our listeners, can relate to like at least a lot of the stuff that you just said, and our own fitness and health journeys as entrepreneurs and just putting ourselves last. But what, from a man and a woman's perspective, what are normal testosterone levels? What are the other things besides testosterone that we should ask our doctor about or ask you about, that we should get tested? What are the red flags we should be looking for? And how do we know how red the flag is?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by this. When you go to any standard physician, they're going to practice in ranges, and those ranges are often set by insurance or the general population that is getting tested. And we, as a clinic, we focus on optimization. We don't focus on a range that is very vast, and those ranges vary. The standard typical range that somebody would tell you is somewhere between 300 and 1,000 for a man's testosterone levels, and a woman's is, honestly, it's a mess. They don't really even know what optimal testosterone is for a woman because there's no clinical indication for it. But that said, when we look at a patient, our guidance is, if symptoms match along with biomarkers in your levels, we typically try to get our guys somewhere between the 700 nanogram per deciliter range up to that 1200 range. And you're going to fluctuate throughout the week and day, depending on what you're doing and how you're working out. Women, on the other hand, their range is a lot different. They don't need as much testosterone, although women do need testosterone, and they have more testosterone than they do estrogen, which most women don't even know because you produce it from testosterone. That said, women can feel good at 50 nanograms per deciliter. They could feel good at 100, 200. But most of the time, when we put women on a dose of testosterone, they're feeling symptoms from it, and we're trying to improve those symptoms by getting them to a better level. So some of the symptoms for men and women are very common. Men have libido issues, women have libido issues. Guys, that can also lead to erectile dysfunction. They don't have, the performance that they would in their erections. But a very common thing is fatigue and just energy levels and just feeling lethargic, brain fog. A lot of women chalk it up to, I had kids, so I have mom brain. A lot of that can be tied to testosterone and hormone levels. And then, look at just standard things. Are you working out as much as you did? How are those workouts? Or did you plateau? Are you gaining muscle? That's a very important thing in all this. And then last and certainly not least is just how you feel day to day. I mean, you should feel good. You should want to get up throughout the day and conquer it. And that just comes back to drive.
That makes sense. And what, besides testosterone, what other things should we be looking at, talking about from a man's and a woman's perspective? I know that testosterone is mostly what I was talking to your team about, and try to optimize that, and that makes a lot of sense for me. But what are the other things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that everybody should do is get complete blood panels every year. And I get this question asked often, at what age? I think the biggest thing I wish I could have done is roll back time and said, what were my scores? What were my levels like in my 20s? Now I'm 40 years old. I know a dramatic event happened in my life. It crushed them. So I would be telling every patient that walks in the door, at least be getting a solid snapshot at that one moment, because that's what a blood test is. It's going to analyze exactly what's going on at that one moment in time. You could come in the next day or the next week and it could be different, but at least you have that snapshot to use as some comparative results. I would be looking at everything from testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. I would be looking at stress markers like cortisol. That's a big one. I'd be looking at anti-inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. For men, PSA, that's going to tell you your prostate levels. And you can go as deep and dirty as you want, but if you're focused on that, you're getting your CBCs, which is your complete blood count. That's going to really tell you the health of a patient. Complete metabolic panel. It's going to tell you your organ function. That's a really good starting point. And you're going to have to probably push your doctor a little bit to say, hey, listen, I really want a complete and full comprehensive panel, versus something that is what I call reactive based testing. A lot of times, what we're seeing right now in healthcare, because of insurance and the way a lot of physicians practice, is they're running one marker at a time based off of some symptomatic feedback. And then they bring you in again, and then they run another. And it's like, well, first of all, that's a horrible way to practice. It's insurance-based practice, number one, but you're never getting that complete snapshot of the patient. And you want to do that each and every time you're coming in, as unless you're honing in and you already have that as a baseline. So at least get one solid baseline with the markers I mentioned.
That makes a ton of sense. And I've gotten a lot of those panels done recently, and they've ranged in price drastically. So just to hopefully save some people some money, what should we expect if we do a full panel, get all the blood taken we need to, and what are we looking at like range wise there typically?
Yeah. So, for us, I can speak to our price ranges start at $49 for men up to $499. And that can vary obviously, but it really depends on how deep you want to go. Our basic male hormone it shouldn't even be called basic, but that's what we call it. It's a 32 marker panel up to close to 100 markers and are more comprehensive. But it really depends on where you're at in your life. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. We try to guide you through that. The other alternative is if you went through a primary care doc, you can try to get your insurance run. But what I mentioned earlier is something that's happening in insurance. They're going to cover certain markers, but they may not cover everything to the extent that we do. And oftentimes, if you haven't been in a certain portion of your insurance policy, you might have to pay out of pocket. So we try to price it pretty competitively. We actually don't make a ton of money on our labs because we have other options that we offer to patients. But I would say you should be somewhere between what I mentioned, and if you're anything beyond that, yeah, you probably should shop around.
Got it. That makes sense. And let's say, we get all that done and we see that something's wrong. What are the most common things that you see wrong, and how do you help us fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say amongst men and women, we see a lot of libido issues. I've lost my energy in the bedroom. I don't have that drive. And it's crazy. We're seeing it at younger and younger levels too, or younger and younger ages, and lower levels. And it's not just a man problem. We see a lot of energy and fatigue. Like, hey, I literally I can't get through the day. And then obvious body composition. My body's changed, and I feel like I can't get it back. And there's so many things that are in play with weight. If your weight is usually off, your hormones are off, and vice versa. So dialing in your hormones, and not just your sex hormones such as testosterone or estrogen or progesterone, really looking at cortisol and growth hormone and all kinds of other great things that can help determine where you're at as a patient.
Josh, you've mentioned energy throughout the day a few times, and I'm wondering how much energy should we be having? Should we be able to get through the day without a nap or like an extra cup of coffee? And I say that because I mean, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. I've personally gone to the doctor and be like, I'm really tired, and their response is not to run blood work. It's, "Are you drinking enough water?" And I'm like, "Yep, I'm pretty sure I am." So, how much energy should we be having optimally during the day?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I would tell you is you should be going to bed tired, and you should be waking up full of energy, and you should be able to get through that day feeling good, and you should be able to accomplish a lot through that day. And if you are taking naps, or you just aren't staying focused, or you don't have the energy to maybe go work out, then I would say that you should challenge your physician and say, hey, I really want to look into some of my hormones. And we see this all the time with patients that are coming to us. a lot of the patients that we're getting are being told exactly that. Are you drinking enough water? What are you eating? That is part of the equation. There's no doubt lifestyle and diet and nutrition play a very relevant role. But if you've checked off all those boxes, or maybe you've plateaued, then maybe you need to start looking at other things from a biological standpoint to help give you that zest again, because that's so important in life.
Yeah, I'm wondering, thank you for that. I think that's really validating to hear. What are some of those things that you think the average person is overlooking? Like, do you think it's sleep? Do you think it's
Yep.
diet?
I think it's all of it. I think we all, as individuals, understand the power of a good sleep. If you're getting your 7, 8 hours in a day, it's extremely valuable. Most people can't function, properly without that. So sleep and recover is extremely important. Diet. Listen, what we say all the time, our therapies are going to help you get there quicker, and they're going to help you get there more efficiently. And that's what they're designed to do. But we are not going to be that person on your shoulder constantly monitoring exactly what you're doing, because you're doing this in a remote station. You have to make the best lifestyle decision. You have to monitor what's going in and out of your mouth. And you have to make sure you're probably slowing down on the drinking. You're doing the right things. You're getting your steps in. You're getting your weight training in. All those things play a dramatic role in how you're going to feel throughout the day.
Hey, it's RT. Thanks so much for listening to the Fast Foundations podcast. I want to see you in the room. I don't want you to just be hearing my and our voices. Let me tell you about the Fast Foundations Mastermind. It's a 6-month-long program, and it's our signature program. It's how you join our community. Every time we talk about this amazing community of almost 400 people that have gone through our mastermind, that we have here on the podcast, that we hear from, and our mentors, all that kind of stuff, all the guest speakers, the coaches, all the awesome things that we get to do, it all starts with the mastermind. It's a 6-month-long program with two-day in-person events. One's in Scottsdale, one's in Denver. Yes, they're in amazing, beautiful places. We have them in cool spots because that's fun. We also give you 6 months with a coach, one-on-one. And the most important thing is, once you go through that mastermind and you learn from all these amazing speakers that we bring in, learn from your coach, grow with me and Jim and the rest of our team, you get lifetime access to our community. Every single thing that we do is recorded and uploaded into a private platform off of Facebook, off of the social medias, all that kind of crap. And it's saved in one place that you have, again, lifetime access to. So when you join the Fast Foundations Mastermind, which you can learn more about at fastfoundations.com and click on Join the Community to apply. When you join this mastermind, you're in our community for life. I really hope to see you in the room, and I hope to talk to you soon. Awesome. So let's use a couple real examples, and maybe we can talk about myself and Lindsay. I know Lindsay's gone through a lot of this stuff with you guys. So starting with the man's perspective, I started my fitness journey in early 2020. After I got COVID the first time. I lost my mom early that year. I just had a bunch of shocks to the system, emotionally, literally, physically. And I was just like, okay, I got to do something about it. And I made a lot of changes all at once. But for most of my life, Josh, I lived at 160 pounds, and I'm 6'2".
Mm-hmm.
And over the last, couple years, I've been putting on muscle, doing everything they say to do. I take a ridiculous amount of vitamins. You guys that follow me on my Instagram stories have seen me line them up like a line. It's crazy. I feel like I'm doing everything right. And I'm up to about 220 pounds.
Wow.
And I feel great in the morning. I get until about 2:00. And obviously I have a ton of businesses, a lot going on, 2 little kids, just like yourself. There's a lot of other stresses in life, but I've tried everything. And then I had all these panels done, and I'm only 32, but my testosterone was 400 something, low 400s. So for someone like me who is on a fitness journey, weightlifting, doing like in general eating pretty well. I can't do a whole lot about the entrepreneurial stresses, like I'm trying every day to make more money and make the financial problems go away, but like what else can I do to optimize that without, I mean, I know one option is testosterone replacement therapy. So if you could speak to that, but just like, what are all the other options if I don't want to go all the way to straight up, direct
Yep.
response like that?
Well, let's talk about TRT just a little bit
Mhm.
because it's a phenomenal therapy, and I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap because of the '80s and '90s and profile of the bodybuilders. Those are like levels that we don't treat. We don't even look to that. When we look at testosterone, we look at what we think is optimal for a man. And when we say replacement, that's what we're doing. We're trying to substitute testosterone to get you to that optimal level. That said, there's some pros, there's some cons. It's a phenomenal therapy. It works really well, but there are some cons, and guys should know that before they're getting in. For example, testosterone, when you get on an exogenous form, meaning it's coming from outside of your body, you're shutting down the body's natural production. That doesn't mean that it won't start back up again, but when that happens, other things can happen, like your testicles can atrophy, meaning get smaller. But you have to make an individual decision, and your physician has to help guide you through that process and say, is it the best thing for me at this point in my life? Maybe, maybe not. And that's only a decision that you guys can make. That said, there's other ways to promote it and boost it naturally. Obviously, food, sunlight, vitamin D is actually important. Taking things like zinc is good for men and women's testosterone. There's other therapies that can improve it, such as clomiphene or enclomiphene. And these are just other therapies that we prescribe that doesn't shut down the body's natural production and stimulates it naturally. Clomiphene is interesting because it was originally designed for, fertility issues for women, but they've prescribed it now for years with a lot of really great results to men to produce testosterone naturally, especially guys who are 50 years and younger who may not be ready to go take that big plunge with TRT. And I think a lot of it still depends on just where you're at in your life. Like, look, when I got on TRT, I was a special case. I was, my mid 30s, and you tested in the 400s. I was in the low 200s,
Oh, wow.
which, I was not the same person I was. And there was probably not much that I could have done, even if I wanted to, because I did want to make different changes that would have pulled me out of that. It truly took, a therapy like TRT to get me in a better position. So there's a lot of things you can do naturally. I think the most important thing is to be honest with yourself, where you're at with your diet. There's a lot of workouts that you could be doing. Lots of people neglect legs, and it's very good for boosting testosterone. Lots of people neglect high intensity interval training where you're splurging and you're cutting back, you're splurging, you're cutting back with your exercises. That's really great for men and women testosterone levels.
Got it. That's all really good advice. And I think the other question I had on that was, besides TRT and the couple things that you mentioned, speaking just to energy, maybe for men and women, because I think that, to me, when I talk to my friends that are entrepreneurs, that same thing that Tiffany described, of that question of just like, I'm just tired at the end of the day. And when I also get the like, well, are you having, are you drinking enough water? Are you eating right? It's like, well, yeah. But like, then I tell the doctor like what I do for a living, and they're like, oh yeah, you're just really stressed. You should probably not do that. It's like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Good
that's not
luck.
helpful.
Yeah.
So, other than
Oh.
those things, what are like all the ways that you can help with energy specifically?
I mean, this is outside of the therapies we do, we would then rebound back to lifestyle. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, or any person who cares about their professional life, like you gotta, something's got to give, and it's either going to be your personal life or your professional life. But something that we preach every day is sleep. You have to make sure you're getting enough sleep. And there's things that you can do to manage your stress. I know it sounds cheesy, but hot and cold therapy is something that's really great. Ice barrel, then heat. Are you journaling? I mean, it sounds like a corny thing, but are you writing down certain things and thoughts? Are you going for walks? Are you getting 10,000 steps in a day? That's super important. Can you meditate? What is your therapeutic release to manage your cortisol, your stress hormone? And if you're doing those things, usually it's going to help tremendously, and it's going to boost other things in your body. But you really got to focus on sleep. You really got to focus on recovery, because those are really, really huge catalysts to having more energy throughout the day.
You know, I'm wondering, mostly because RT and I, a lot of times, are like, well, how quickly can we get this done? So, what can people expect if they do have a hormone imbalance? How much time do they need to take to get those back in balance typically? I'm sure it varies person to person, right?
Yeah, I will tell you, I think men and women are a little bit different. Both species is going to feel something within the first 30 days. It may not be dramatic, but most men are going to start feeling pretty good after about 90 days. And then they peak between 6 months and a year. Women tend to take a little bit longer because you're dealing with a few different hormones. But you're going to feel it within 30, 45 days. And then from that point on, it's really dialing in based off of your feedback. Here's how I feel throughout the day. My sleep is off, or maybe it's great, so we're not going to adjust this. So it takes a really thoughtful provider at that point. But I would say both man and woman, you're going to want to give yourself a solid 6 months before you make any determinations, good or bad.
And in Lindsay's case, when she was, working with you guys, I think her testosterone level was like a 5, or something
Yeah.
like very like negligible, right?
Yeah.
And so she's doing, I mean, you guys gave her like the whole panel of everything, and so we're trying it all. And I mean, she's probably only 2 weeks in so far, but she feels great, and
Yeah.
she's like energy specifically. She feels like the testosterone makes a huge difference. But when you talk about how long you do it, and then you mentioned with TRT that like you can get off of it at some point. For people in their let's say people in their 30s, do you recommend, it sounds like you started in your mid 30s, do you recommend like a certain age or a certain kind of time when you might try a bunch of other things first before you get into those replacement therapies? Like, are there any rules of thumb there for people that are, I would say, generally healthy, like us?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, we're always going to preach lifestyle and diet before we consider that. And if those boxes have been checked, then we're going to focus on your symptoms. I mean, we get a lot of guys who come into us that have low testosterone scores but don't feel bad at all. And so it's not just a number. It really then comes back to symptoms. But I would tell you, we're pretty gun shy on testosterone replacement for guys under 40 without really coaching and lifestyle. But there's also alternatives, like I talked about. There's Clomid, there's enclomiphene, that are natural ways to promote testosterone, and those are very effective. I mean, we've seen guys boost their score from 300 to 600 or 800. It can boost 100 to 250%, and they've been around for a long time and with very, very minimal side effects. So yeah, we have a slight criteria, but there's always the outliers. We've definitely put guys on it younger than 40. And we've done the same for guys who are in their late 40s and said, hey, you're not a candidate for TRT yet. And this is why. But it's a very thoughtful approach, and it's not just based off of biomarkers.
Awesome. Is there something similar for the women's side of things? Is there a certain target demographic or range you're looking for, or is it mostly? I mean, most of the people that I know that are exploring these kind of options are people like Lindsay, who have just had, she just had 2 kids, and she's been talking to me about energy or lack thereof. And I really, when you said earlier, like the brain fog, and it's just like, oh, it's like it's mom brain, like she talks about that all the time on her podcast. So what does that look like from a female's perspective?
Yeah, there's not a Clomid or enclomiphene for women, and if it is, it's primarily used for fertility. That said, testosterone can obviously be considered, but just dialing in estrogen and progesterone for women can be extremely effective, because if those levels are off, it's probably contributing to poor sleep, which is then just screwing up your whole day. But then there's other things. A lot of women do really respond well. Men and women do really great with growth hormone peptides, and we help a lot of women and men with weight management with a lot of GLP-1 medications, which is short for glucagon-like peptides, that are FDA approved. And if you follow the program, the pounds fly off with it, which can make a dramatic change in your life. So there's other things we can do. We like I mentioned earlier, we typically want to start with a lab, look under the hood, see what's missing, and then we'll make an assessment from there.
How often are you retesting through the process, Josh?
It varies from patient to patient, but I would say if you are on any type of hormone medication, for men, it's going to probably be between 4 and 5 times a year, maybe six. And then women, it's probably between 4 and 8 times a year. And a lot of it is patient feedback, seeing if the biomarkers adjust to that. But it's funny. We'll have guys that let's say we get them on TRT and they've been on it for a while, and maybe their levels don't change that much from a a paper standpoint, but they feel great, and we won't do much at all. So much is depending on the patient and just being honest.
That makes sense. I'm wondering about how you mentioned this at the very beginning, how cortisol plays into all of this, because I think that's affects both men and women and can obviously, like, at least what I know about cortisol is it can contribute to belly fat, contribute to like fight or flight and anxiety. And I'm just wondering how that ties in with men and women's hormones.
Yeah, it's a major hormone, and it's a human hormone. So we all possess it, and it is a catalyst to so much of our day-to-day life that people don't even realize. And there are so many antagonists that I think we are hit with in a day, whether it's traffic and driving to work, whether it's, not getting a good night's rest, whether it's, work, whether it's our phones. I mean, we're so addicted to phones, and there's these, dopamine and serotonin releases, and that also contributes to stress. I would tell you this: most people could be very, very optimized naturally if they could control their stress levels. So it's an important marker to understand. It's an important thing to try to improve from day to day, and it's not easy. And I think that's why you're seeing so many of these interesting things come out. I mean, the ice plunge thing is blowing up, and for good reason, because it helps you manage your cortisol levels. It helps you manage your, just your confidence, and hot therapy. I mean, we're really starting to see this emergence, in that you're starting to see a ton of people meditating, and it's all just to honestly live a more zen life, and I think it's really good.
I'm curious if there's any correlation. Like, do you ever notice that when there is high cortisol, these hormones are usually out of whack, or do they usually go together or no?
Yes, 100%. If you're living in a high stress environment, your hormones almost everywhere in your body, and men, a substantial amount, can be changed with testosterone. The same for women, the same with estrogen, the same with progesterone. So yes, cortisol can be a phenomenal benefit to the human body. It can be a huge detriment as well, and that's why it's so important.
Cool. So if you're stressed, like most of us, we need to go get a full blood count.
And at least figure
That's
out
the
what's going on.
takeaway. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
that's my takeaway for sure. We Josh, we talk about just the unknowns in business, in the financial side of life. It's just like, if you know what's coming and you know the facts and you know the data, then you can plan accordingly. And that's really one of the coolest things about doing a podcast like this is we start to realize like, oh yeah, those are some numbers I should probably know, and we should probably be talking about it. So
You
thank you
know,
for that.
you bet.
Before we move on or wrap up, I'm just curious, do you have, some like, I don't want to say like success stories, but like some examples, if you're willing to, share at least in theory, some people that have done this, maybe that were entrepreneurs or were feeling that level of entrepreneurial stress. Besides yourself, obviously, it sounds. I mean, your journey is fascinating, but have you worked with anyone recently like us and seen some cool stuff happen?
Yeah, being the founder of the company, it's not often that I'm doing a lot of the day-to-day management with patients, but I do occasionally get the great calls. I occasionally get the bad calls too, where we
Sure.
might have, messed things up, and that doesn't happen often, but we're human. So, but yeah, man, we have. I mean, there's so many stories that, whether it's, friends of a friend or, just straight up customers. I mean, we've literally gotten people off of pre-diabetic states by helping them lose weight, managing their insulin levels. I've had numerous customers call me and say, "Hey, I listened to you on Instagram or um, a podcast, and you talked about how you saved your marriage, and I thought you were full of shit." And then I realized like I kind of had the same issues. And honestly, man, like it changed my life when I finally got my stuff dialed in. And there's so many of those stories, and it I feel like the My Pillow guy, and I say this often, but like I'm a user, I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, and I believe in these therapies to my core, but they also just work. It's rare we get somebody where they're like, you know what, I didn't feel shit. And you gotta peel the onion back and go, are you doing it right? Because that doesn't make any sense. You're gonna feel something. It's not like a supplement where you're like, I'm just taking this because I saw some marketing gimmick. I don't know if it's working. I don't know if it's placebo. These actually work. They're drugs. They're therapies, and they really move the needle. So I have a lot to name. I mean, we have so many gut health stories where somebody had a unique autoimmune issue that they couldn't resolve or they couldn't figure out. And, we'll get these random calls. We're like, holy shit, I can go to the bathroom the right way. It's crazy, So it's a pretty fun gig to be part of when you're changing people's lives.
I love it. Well, thank you, Josh, for the wisdom you shared today and just all the little nuggets of things we should look into and things we should really know about ourselves and our bodies. How do we find more information about you, and all the things that we do, and how can people connect with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I try to be less active on social, but I'm on there. And if anybody wants to find us on social, that's where a lot of our community lies. Our men's handle is at Get Blokes, and then my handle is at Whalen underscore Joshua. And then our ladies can they need the love too. The Instagram handle is at Joy Women's Wellness, and there's a lot of great things happening over there. Women are far better consumers, and women are pushing their men to get checked just as much as themselves. So we appreciate the ladies doing that. And yeah, and
And
then our
Josh, really
website.
quick, it's
Yep.
spelled J-O, it's not.
Yeah, it's Joy, Joi, Women's Wellness. So
Mm,
at Joy Women's Wellness. And the websites for the ladies is at choosejoy.co. And for men, it's blokes.co, Blokes.co.
got it. And we'll put all those links underneath us here on YouTube
Sweet.
if you're watching us, or in the notes on the podcast platforms. Josh, anything else you want to share before we hop off?
No, I think, listen, for your listeners, health is wealth. And I know what changed in my life as an entrepreneur, as a dad, as a husband. I feel like I got my life back, and whether it's through us or somebody else, take your health serious, because it's a lot harder to get back when you let it go too long, and just own the journey in your health. just like you're owning it as an entrepreneur.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate you.
You bet.
That's it for this episode of Fast Foundations Podcast Mentor Session with Josh Whalen. And we talked about Blokes and just optimizing health. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform, or just go directly to fastfoundations.com. We can't wait to talk to you and hear what you want to hear next.